My dad ordered me to show up at my sister's wedding or he'd cut off my tuition payments. He said it like a verdict, like he owned me. What he didn't know was that I'd already graduated valedictorian, landed a six-figure job, and hadn't needed his money for years. Still, I went. Not to celebrate, but to end something that should have ended long ago. The moment he bragged to the guests about how he funded my education, I pulled an envelope from my jacket and placed it in his hand. His smile froze. When he opened it, every secret he'd built his pride on began to crumble. That's the moment my family stopped being a family, and I finally started breathing again. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you are here with me and listening to me. Comment hi below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reached. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. Not because it helps the channel, but because every story here belongs to someone who finally found the courage to speak. My name is Kieran Rothvale, and this is how I stopped mistaking control for love. The phone rang before sunrise, slicing through the fog outside my apartment in Belltown. "You're coming to the wedding, Kieran." My father's voice barked through the line. "If you skip it, I'll stop paying your tuition. You hear me?" His tone had the same edge it always did, authority disguised as concern. I stared at the desk in front of me, the offer letter from Everblue Systems. The wedding invitation embossed in gold from Aspen and a cashier's check for $14,980, the exact amount he'd paid for my first semester of college 9 years ago, interest included. The irony was almost cinematic. He thought he could still control me with money I hadn't needed in years. What he didn't know was that I'd already graduated valedictorian. From the University of Washington, landed a six-figure salary at one of the top environmental firms in the Pacific Northwest, and built a life entirely on my own. I'd let him believe his illusion because silence, I'd learned, was my best weapon. I didn't tell him that there was no tuition left to pay, no balance to threaten. I just listened, let him rant about family duty, and sacrifice words that had long since lost their meaning. When he hung up, I sat there tracing the edge of the envelope that held the check. Inside, it was more than money. It was the end of leverage, the quiet undoing of a narrative he'd built around himself. On my desk, I opened a blank page and began writing a boundary letter. My hand steady, even as my stomach twisted. From this moment forward, I owe you nothing. No tuition, no obedience, no silence. You will not use money as a leash again. The letter was calm, precise, almost legal in tone. I folded it and slipped it into the same envelope as the check. Together they felt heavier than paper should. For years, my father's favorite story was that he sacrificed for my education. He mentioned it at every holiday dinner, every family reunion, every conversation that started with, "You should be grateful." What he never said was that after the first semester, I took out loans, worked nights, cleaning labs, and applied for every scholarship I could find. He liked the version where he was the hero. I was just the background proof of his virtue. As I sealed the envelope, I glanced at the USB drive. Beside it, a backup of my valedictorian speech, my awards, my transcript. Evidence, should I ever need to prove I wasn't the failure he painted me to be. But this time, the proof wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. The plan was simple. Attend the wedding, hand him the envelope, and walk away. No scene, no argument, just closure. 3 goals sat clear in my mind. Repay the symbolic debt. Reclaim my voice. And refuse the emotional bait that had trapped me my entire life. Before leaving for work, I checked the flight confirmation on my phone, Seattle to Denver, departing Friday night. I slipped the envelope into my suit pocket and zipped the bag shut. The faint smell of paper and ink lingered in the air. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was freedom disguised as stationery. As the city stirred awake below my window, I whispered, "When he opens that envelope, I'll close a whole era." By the time I arrived in Boulder, the sky had turned the color of old silver. My parents' house stood at the edge of town, perfectly polished for appearances, white columns, trimmed hedges, every window glowing. Inside, it felt more like a museum than a home. The walls were lined with framed photos of Aubrey. My younger sister, her ballet recitals, pageant crowns, engagement photos with Blake Montrose, the man everyone called the perfect son-in-law. Not one picture of me past high school hung anywhere. Mom, Margot, floated through the room in pearls giving orders to the caterer. Remember, Harlan, the photographer's coming early. Everything needs to look perfect. My father stood near the fireplace, scotch in hand, already performing for aunts and uncles who had flown in from Texas and California. Our Aubrey, he said loudly, marrying into such a fine family. And Kieran? Well, he's taking a little time off school to fix some grades, but we're covering his tuition. Family always takes care of its own. The laughter that followed was polite admiring. And then every face turned toward me, pity softening their eyes. I felt heat crawl up my neck. That wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a script. In that moment I understood he'd been telling people I'd failed out of my program. That I was still dependent on him. The myth of the selfless father supporting his struggling son played better in front of strangers. And he loved an audience. I gripped the edge of the dining chair, forcing myself to smile. If I snapped here in this room full of crystal glasses and curated admiration, I'd become the villain in his story again. So I waited. Timing was everything. After dinner, while the others moved to the patio for champagne, I slipped down the hallway toward my old room. The air smelled of cedar and nostalgia gone stale. On the desk, the family printer blinked with a red light out of paper. One sheet sat half ejected, still warm from the tray. I pulled it out. It was an email draft from my father to a cousin, Kieran's still relying on us financially, poor kid. We just can't turn our backs on him. No attachments. Just that. A lie dressed in charity. I took a photo of it with my phone proof for later. When I returned to the living room, the sound of laughter poured through the French doors. Aubrey glowed under the fairy lights, surrounded by bridesmaids. She turned and saw me, waving cheerfully. Kieran, you're here. Try to look a little less corporate tomorrow, okay? Blake's family loves a certain aesthetic. I nodded, pretending amusement. Sure, whatever you say. She didn't mean harm. She was simply fluent in the language of appearance my parents had taught her. Back in the kitchen, Mom intercepted me with that diplomatic smile of hers. Sweetheart, I hope you're not upset about what your father said earlier. You know how he gets when he's proud. Proud, I repeated softly. Is that what that was? Her smile faltered. He just wants everyone to know you're doing fine. By saying I failed. She blinked. Don't ruin the mood before the big day, Kieran. I let it drop. Arguing with her was like shouting into wallpaper. It looked sturdy, but it only covered cracks. Later, as the house quieted, I wandered into the hallway again. The seating chart for the wedding hung by the door. My name sat on the far edge of the ballroom layout next to a pillar almost out of view. Even the furniture would have a better view of Aubrey's vows than I would. Standing there under the glow of the chandelier, I caught the sound of my father's voice outside, bragging to guests. He still depends on me, he said, and they laughed, impressed by his generosity. I touched the inside pocket of my suit where the envelope rested. Tomorrow that lie would burn itself alive. I whispered, only until he opens it. When I walked upstairs to my old room, I didn't feel rage anymore, just precision. Every step was measured. The next day wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about truth. Delivered in the simplest form possible, paper ink, and a signature that no longer bound me to anyone. Aspen looked like a painting that didn't belong to me. White roses arched over the aisle, fairy lights shimmered against the pine forest, and every detail of the Rothvale wedding screamed money, perfection, and control. My mother was everywhere at once, adjusting centerpieces, correcting photographers, barking gentle orders masked as compliments. Kieran, your tie doesn't match the color palette, she said, handing me another silk one. I didn't argue. I'd learned long ago that compliance was quieter than truth. I tied it and waited in the corner while stylists swirled around my sister. Aubrey sat under a halo of ring lights, her makeup flawless, her smile rehearsed. I couldn't remember the last time she'd looked at me like I was her brother, not a shadow standing in her reflection. The air reeked of perfume and pressure. I slipped out to the hallway for some air. That's when I heard Blake's voice low and sharp from behind one of the wooden doors. Uncle Harlan, $25,000 wasn't a gift, he said, his tone clipped. You said you'd pay me back after the wedding. Don't ask for more until you do. The door clicked. My heart stilled. My father, Harlan Rothvale, had borrowed money from the man marrying his daughter. The proud businessman who lectured me about financial integrity was using his future son-in-law's bank account to keep his empire afloat. I waited until Blake walked past me, his phone still pressed to his ear, then turned the other way, my thoughts racing. Back inside, the wedding planner stopped me to check the seating chart. My name wasn't where it had been. It had been moved to the service coordination table near the back next to the catering crew. It's just easier for logistics, Mom said when she caught my look. Easier for logistics, harder for dignity. I folded the chart and slipped it into my jacket pocket, my hands steady but my jaw tight. A few minutes before the ceremony, Dad found me near the archway of white hydrangeas. He straightened my lapel like an act of ownership. Smile, he said softly. The family's paying for that smile. His breath smelled of whiskey and pride. There are things I've already paid for, I said evenly. He paused, confused by my calmness. For the first time, he didn't have a script ready. Guests were gathering. Cameras clicked. The music rehearsals echoed faintly across the courtyard. I reached into my jacket and felt the envelope between my fingers. It was warm now, molded to the shape of my decision. I took a step toward him. For you, I said, offering it. His hand hovered before taking it. What's this? The first semester you always remind me about, I said. Every cent you ever claimed bought my loyalty. He tore it open impatiently. Inside lay the check and my letter. His eyes darted from the handwriting to my face, his expression shifting from confusion to fury to disbelief. For a second, everything around us stilled, the music test cut off. The photographer lowered his camera. Even my mother's voice vanished mid-sentence. I spoke clearly, letting every word fall like a stone into water. Consider it paid back, Dad. Don't use it as a leash anymore. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was electric. My mother's mouth opened then closed. A cousin gasped. Someone muttered my name like a warning. I turned and walked away through the pines, my shoes crunching against gravel. I didn't look back, not even when I heard Aubrey's voice calling faintly behind me. The sky above the trees looked heavy, like it was waiting for something to break. When I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. Mom calling, then Aubrey texting. What are you doing? Please don't ruin this. A voicemail followed 15 seconds long. A male voice I recognized instantly, calm, controlled, slightly strained. We need to talk, Blake said. I stood there a moment, the mountains rising silent behind the resort, and whispered to myself, it's time to stop playing the supporting role in someone else's story. I started the car and drove down the winding road, leaving behind the perfect family portrait as it cracked in silence. A week later, Seattle's sky was the color of cold steel. The air smelled of salt and damp leaves. I sat by the window of Cannes, Harbor's Edge. A small cafe by the pier, watching the mist roll in from the water. When Blake arrived, he looked nothing like the man in Aspen. His hair was tousled, his eyes rimmed with fatigue, his confidence dimmed to something human. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, and sat down across from me. We need to talk, he said again, quieter this time. And please don't tell Aubrey we met. I didn't answer, just nodded. His hands fidgeted around the cup. Your dad owes me 25 grand, he started. He promised to pay it back right after the wedding, but instead he asked for another 20. Said he just needed to cover some last-minute expenses. He laughed bitterly. Guess that means the photographer's getting paid before I am. I waited. It was strange hearing another man carry my family's shame out loud. He told me not to mention it to your mom, Blake continued. Said it would just upset her. But after the wedding, he ghosted me. Calls, texts, nothing. My stomach clenched, but not from surprise. It was from recognition. The house of mirrors had finally cracked. He's in trouble, I said quietly. Blake looked at me sharply. You knew I didn't need to. You just confirmed it. He studied me for a long second. Then tell me something. Are you really still in grad school because that's what your dad told everyone? I laughed short and low. No. I graduated 3 months ago. Valedictorian, full scholarship. I work at Everblue Systems. I make more money than he ever did at my age. He leaned back, exhaling hard. I figured as much. He talks too much about sacrifice. Men who brag about what they've given are usually hiding what they've taken. There was a pause. The barista set down a plate between us, the clatter echoing in the quiet. Blake's voice softened. You should know he used your name on the paperwork for his company's new loan. I checked the registration files for Rothvale Financial. The property is under his name, but the borrower's signature belongs to you. Electronic approval from your email. I froze. That's impossible. I'm afraid it's not. The IP address traces back to his office computer. Probably forged the authorization. The coffee suddenly tasted metallic. My father hadn't just lied, he'd turned my name into collateral. He used me, I murmured. Blake nodded slowly. He's sinking, Kieran. The company's bleeding. If he doesn't fix it soon, he's done. Look, I didn't come here to expose him, I just wanted you to know before Aubrey finds out through someone else. I looked out the window where the gulls skimmed the gray water. So that's what it comes down to, I said quietly. Debt and pride. Blake gave a small shrug. Your father built his life on reputation. Debt is just another form of control. Maybe he thinks he can rebuild it if he pretends long enough. He reached into his phone and turned the screen toward me. It was a screenshot of a bank transfer. The note line read, "For tuition, K." The air left my lungs. My name wasn't just borrowed, it was bought, sold, and printed as a justification. Blake's voice broke through the fog. I'm sorry, man. I really am. I nodded once. Don't be. You just confirmed what I already knew, that I'll never be free until he runs out of ways to use my name. We sat in silence. The hum of the espresso machine filled the space where words couldn't reach. When Blake left, he placed a few bills on the table and said quietly, If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me. I stayed long after he was gone, watching the rain slide down the glass, turning the harbor lights into streaks of silver. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for my father. Then I remembered the fake smile at the wedding, the whispers about my failure, the forged signature. When I finally stepped outside, the wind off the bay cut straight through my coat. My phone buzzed again. The caller ID said, Mom. I answered, expecting another plea for peace, another half-truth wrapped in guilt. Instead, her voice trembled. Kieran. Your father collapsed at the office. They said it was a mild stroke. I didn't speak for a moment. The city noise faded, leaving only the distant cry of a ship's horn. Is he awake? I asked. They don't know yet, she whispered. Please come home. I hung up, staring at the wet pavement. The harbor lights rippled against the water like fractured glass. The storm wasn't over. It was only changing form. I slipped my hands into my pockets and started walking toward the pier, the wind biting at my face. Whatever was coming next, it wouldn't be about guilt anymore. It would be about truth, and I was finally ready to face it. St. Luke's smelled like bleach and stale coffee. Through the window, the Rockies wore a thin line of snow, bright against a gray afternoon. My mother met me at the elevator and folded me into her perfume and trembling hands. You're still my best boy, she said, voice shivering. Your father regrets everything. I didn't answer. Regret in our house was a story you told when you needed something. In the room, my father lay on his side, eyes closed, the beeping even and indifferent. When he heard my shoes, his lids cracked open. You came, he said, as if we were resuming an old meeting. Good. Now help me. We can't let the company collapse. No thank you. No apology. Just the familiar command wrapped in urgency. I pulled the visitor's chair closer. Did you use my name to secure a loan? He didn't look away. You have credibility. Banks trust you. As if that settled it. As if borrowing my name was no different than borrowing a stapler. Something cold slid down my spine. I glanced at my mother. She held my gaze for a heartbeat, then let it fall to her lap. He only wanted to save what he built, she whispered. Don't make a scene. There it was, the family creed. Order over honesty. Image over truth. I stood. I won't sign anything. I won't fix this for you. My father's mouth tightened. You'd let your own blood drown. I thought of the forged authorization of the seating chart near the catering station of the envelope under the arch. You taught me to swim, I said. You also taught me who throws people into the deep end. I stepped into the hall. The door clicked behind me. The carpet swallowed footfall and anger alike. Kieran. Aubrey's voice came soft from the corner. She looked smaller without her bridal armor cheeks, bare eyes wide. Blake told me about the money. I didn't know Dad borrowed from him. I didn't know any of it. Her fingers twisted the sleeve of her sweater like a worry string. What's really going on? For the first time in a long time, I saw uncertainty instead of gloss. I wanted to hand her a clean, painless truth. There wasn't one. Don't take anybody's word. Not mine, not theirs. Ask for the documents. Bank statements, emails, contracts. Read every line. I took out my phone and pulled up the photo of the printed email, the one where our father told a cousin I still lived off his generosity. I sent it to her and watched her throat work as she read. She hugged the air in front of her like she might fold herself in half. That night, I flew back to Seattle. The city lights pulled apart beneath the wing like a string of broken pearls. Somewhere over Utah, I opened my inbox. A message from my father's company sat on top. If you expose this family, you'll regret it. I will not tolerate betrayal from my own son. I stared at the screen until my reflection replaced the words. For years, I'd been the ungrateful child in their story. Now I could see the shape of the truth. No one here wanted to rescue me. They wanted to preserve their reflection. Denver shrank to a glittering map below. For the first time, I understood what my father feared more than illness. Not death, not failure. He feared losing the power to define what we were. 3 weeks later, the rain in Seattle came down in clean vertical lines. Greta called me into her office at Everblue and slid a folder across the desk. You're presenting in Denver, she said. Rocky Range is ours to lose. I nodded, the irony not lost on either of us. To return to the city where my father's name was unraveling and stand up as my own man, it felt like the universe had a sense of staging. The day before I flew, an email from my mother arrived, formal and pleading. Your father needs you to re-sign the guarantee. If you don't, the bank will seize the office. He promised he'll let you live your life after this. The syllables of promise and after had worn grooves in my family's tongue. I replied with a single page, attached my refusal, the scan of the check I'd given back, the photo of his email, and screenshots of transfers from Blake labeled for my tuition. I didn't twist the knife. I just made sure the blade had a name. An hour later, my phone rang. Aubrey's voice was hoarse. Dad wants to declare bankruptcy and shift assets to Mom's name first. He told me it's legal. I don't know who to believe. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the rain collect in a glass on the sill. If you stay quiet, you'll be part of it. Save the documents. Send copies to someone outside the family. If he's right, you'll be protected. If he's wrong, you'll be protected. She cried without hiding it. I believed them for so long. Me too, I said. Belief is easy when the story flatters you. That night, a blocked number texted, "Don't come to Denver. People will hear you cheated your way up at Everblue. Nice promotion. Shame if it vanished." The timing was almost elegant. I booked my flight anyway. I landed in the thin morning air, checked into a downtown hotel, and spread the materials across the desk. Hydrology models, phased conservation targets, cost curves, contingency methods for drought and flood years. A knock sounded. Blake stood in the doorway, hands in his coat pockets. "I won't stay long," he said. "Aubrey talked to me. She sent the records to a lawyer. I'm done shielding your father. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I think you gave him more grace than he ever gave you. When the door closed behind him, the room felt lighter, like a window had cracked. At City Hall, the chamber smelled of varnish and old arguments. Greta opened with scope and vision. I took the podium for the technical core. I spoke about aquifer recharge and closed-loop reuse, about equity and infrastructure. So the savings didn't skip the poorest neighborhoods, about measuring success every quarter and changing course when data demanded it. I kept my voice, even my hands, still. I thought about the house in Boulder and the printed email, about the envelope in Aspen, about how systems fail when they are built on false inputs. When questions came, they were sharp but clean. What happens in a cold year with heavy snowmelt? How do we phase the construction to minimize service disruption? Where does the first 10% come from? I answered with the model, with field data, with a plan that didn't require faith, only math and time. We shook hands afterward in the corridor. As I packed my bag, my phone rang. Oh, Bree. They sealed the office, she said, breath-catching. The accounts are frozen. They want Dad to cooperate. Mom is saying this is your fault. I leaned against the cool marble wall and watched a janitor push a cart past the door. Let it all get washed, I said. People too. It's the only way anything grows back right. That night, Denver threw its lights against the hotel glass until the city looked like it was floating. I sat on the hallway bench and dialed through nothing, letting the quiet find me. A message arrived from my father. When you need forgiveness, remember who gave you life. I deleted it without breathing hard. You did, I said into the empty corridor, and I did too. I lay awake and thought about water, how it refuses to keep secrets, how it finds the lowest point, gathers, rises, breaks through the softest part of a dam. My family had been a dam made of stories. The pressure had been building my whole life. In the morning, with the sun barely warming the facades, Denver looked cleaner than it had the night before. On the flight home, I opened my laptop and refined a slide about monitoring. If a system is honest about its leaks, it can be fixed before it fails. If a family can't be, it fails before it admits it's broken. I closed the lid and watched the clouds divide like pages, knowing I was done asking anyone else to write my chapter. The courtroom in downtown Denver smelled of paper and dusted marble, like time itself had been archived here. The light from the tall windows fell in pale stripes across the long table. I walked in with steady steps, the sound of my shoes echoing against the floor. My father sat on one side, his posture rigid, his suit slightly wrinkled as if pressed by shaking hands. My mother was beside him, fingers knotted around each other so tightly they looked bloodless. Aubrey sat 2 seats away, eyes fixed on the documents in front of her. Blake stood near the witness row, arms folded, his expression unreadable. The clerk called my name, Kieran Rothvale, as a named party in the financial review of Rothvale Financial. I wasn't here as a defendant. I was here because my name had been borrowed, forged, and printed in ink on debts that weren't mine. The hearing began with the auditor's voice calm but slicing through the air. The records show a business loan under the name of Kieran Rothvale, authorized electronically. He clicked through the presentation on the screen. We traced the IP address to the company's office in Boulder. The device used was registered to Mr. Harlan Rothvale. For a moment, silence. Then my father spoke, firm and indignant. I did what I had to do to protect the company. It's called leadership. My mother gasped. You forged his name. Her words were small, almost swallowed by the room. He turned to her sharply. I built everything you have. Don't lecture me about paperwork. I leaned forward, voice even. You didn't protect anything, Dad. You buried it, and you used me as the shovel. The auditor cleared his throat, continuing his report. Additionally, there's an email trail between Mr. Rothvale and several investors misrepresenting his son's financial dependence as a means to secure sympathy funding. I stood, reaching into my folder. Those are the emails, I said, placing printed copies on the table along with the check I'd returned to him in Aspen, the same one he once used to buy my silence. This check, I said, was his favorite story, how he paid my tuition, how I owed him my future. I returned it so he'd know I wasn't for sale. And this letter I held up the folded page from the same envelope states in my own words that I refuse to be guarantor for any of his loans. That's my boundary in writing. That's consent withdrawn. The lawyer for the bank nodded toward the bench. That document qualifies as a valid written refusal of guarantee. He turned to my father. Mr. Rothvale, your company will lose its operating license. The assets will be liquidated pending audit. My mother let out a soft cry. She reached for my father's arm, but he shook her off, red climbing up his neck. You, he hissed at me. You've destroyed your own family. No, I said quietly. You destroyed it the moment you traded our names for a line of credit. A chair scraped behind me. Aubrey stood. Her voice trembled but carried through the room. I'm the one who sent the files to the auditors, she said. I couldn't watch him take Kieran down for something he didn't do. Her words fell into the silence like a confession and a release all at once. My mother covered her mouth eyes wide. My father turned stunned, not by guilt, but by betrayal. The judge's gavel came down lightly, a sound more final than loud. The session adjourned. I gathered my papers, each one a fragment of the truth, and walked out into the morning light. On the courthouse steps, the wind was sharp enough to cut. I looked up at the sky, the same washed-out blue I'd seen the day I'd handed over that first envelope. Only now it didn't hang over me, it opened above me. Behind me I heard my mother calling my name. Kieran, please don't let them put him in prison. He's still your father. I turned halfway, met her tear-streaked eyes. I don't decide his sentence, I said softly. I only decide that he doesn't get to write mine anymore. Papers flapped in my hands as the wind surged. They weren't evidence now. They were air. Blake and Aubrey stood near the base of the stairs. I know you didn't do this out of revenge, Blake said quietly. I nodded. No. I did it because someone in this family had to start telling the truth. My mother's sobs followed me down the steps, fading into the hum of city traffic. I didn't look back. Some things only grow when you stop watering the lies. 3 months later, the mornings in Seattle felt new again. The air was crisp, salted by the sound of the bay. I sat by the window of my office at Everblue Systems, watching sunlight crawl across my desk. The Rocky Range project had been approved, the contracts signed. My name, my real untarnished name, was on every document. Greta dropped by my office, smiled and said, Project Manager Rothvale, it has a ring to it. For once, the title didn't feel borrowed. When she left, I noticed an envelope sitting among the morning mail. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was my mother's. Inside was a faded family photo, me at 10, Aubrey at 6, our father standing tall between us. Behind it, a note in her slanted script. We're selling the house. Your father is recovering. If you want to talk, he'll listen now. I stared at it for a while, waiting for anger to come. It didn't. Neither did forgiveness. What I felt was the quiet relief of no longer needing either. I took a clean sheet of paper and wrote back. I hold no anger, but I won't return. When he understands that truth is the only inheritance worth keeping, I'll still be here living honestly, still carrying the name Rothvale, but on my own terms. I slipped it into a new envelope and sent it before I could second-guess the piece in it. That evening, my phone rang. It was Aubrey. Her voice sounded lighter, stripped of pretense. I left Boulder, she said. I'm coming to Seattle. I want to start over. I don't know if you'll want me around after everything. If you're doing it for yourself, not for them, I said you'll always have a place here. She didn't answer. We sat in silence together, the good kind, the kind that means something is finally being rebuilt. When we hung up, I stepped outside. The water in the bay shimmered under the autumn sun, and for a moment it looked exactly like the afternoon I'd driven away from Aspen. Only this time, there was no bitterness. Just a steady calm, the kind that stays after a storm empties itself. I thought back through every scene, my father's threats, the envelope, the fake tuition stories, the courtroom, my sister's trembling confession. All the words that once trapped me, ungrateful, rebellious, unfilial, had lost their power. They were just noise meant to keep me small. Once I stopped listening, they disappeared. Later that day, I left the office and walked to the same cafe by the harbor where Blake and I had first spoken. The sea breeze carried the same scent of coffee and salt. I pulled out the old empty envelope I'd kept in my wallet since Aspen. Its creases had softened, its weight almost gone. On its back I wrote one final sentence. No one owes anyone anymore, not even the past. I left it on the table and walked out, the doorbell chiming softly behind me. Outside, Seattle rain began to fall, gentle, cleansing, endless. I lifted my face to it and let it soak through my hair, through the last remnants of everything that used to define me. I used to believe freedom came when others finally apologized. But real freedom, I've learned, begins the moment you stop waiting for it. My father lost his grip on power. I gained mine. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone else's story, only my own. Some stories aren't about revenge, they're about release. I didn't win against my father. I simply walked away from the battlefield he built. And that, I've learned, is the quiet kind of victory. If my story reached you, take a moment to share yours. Maybe you've had to cut ties to find peace too. Comment below, tell me where you're from, or just say listening. And don't forget to subscribe. Every voice here reminds someone they're not alone in breaking free. My dad told me I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving. When I asked why, my mom hesitated, then said, "Your brother's bringing his girlfriend. He says, your blue-collar job would embarrass him. He doesn't want people to think you're related." I stood there, holding a pie I'd baked for them, still warm in my hands. She looked at it, then looked away. "This is no place for people like you." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, "I understand." 5 days later, they showed up at my door, panicked, furious, demanding answers. Turns out, my brother's perfect girlfriend wasn't who she said she was. And I wasn't who they thought I was either. "Hi, my name is Asher, Kane. I used to think silence was the safest place to live, that if I stayed quiet, maybe they'd leave me a little dignity. But what they took instead was everything else. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story can reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if this story touches something in you, or reminds you of someone who's ever felt cast aside, please consider subscribing. It means more than you know, to be heard, even once. Disregardie of November, late afternoon. The light outside had taken on that soft golden hue that only came during the tail end of fall in Asheville. Through my living room window, I could see the last of the red leaves floating down onto the yard, collecting on the hood of my old Chevy pickup, like nature's quiet goodbye. Inside, the fireplace crackled low, casting flickers of orange across the brick wall. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old books, familiar, grounding. I sat at the wooden coffee table, folding the last corner of the paper around the box I'd been working on for days. Inside was a soft, hand-knit scarf I'd made for my mom, light gray with deep blue edges, the same shade as her eyes when she was happy. Alongside it, I'd tucked an old first edition of The History of American Football I'd found at a used bookstore downtown. It still had the yellowed price tag on the inside cover. My dad would love it, I was sure. I ran my hand along the edge of the box, smoothing the twine I'd tied in a cross. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, like everything else in my life. With the box sitting neatly on the table, I picked up my phone and dialed the number I knew by heart. The line rang twice before Mom answered. Constrained, "Hello?" she said, her voice breathy like she hadn't expected me to call. Trying to sound casual. "Just wanted to check what time I should swing by on Thursday. I've got something for you and Dad." There was a pause, too long to miss. "Asher?" she began, and my stomach already knew. "I think it's best if you don't come this year." Silence clamped around me like cold steel. "Is everything okay?" I asked slowly. "It's just... Gideon wants the dinner to go smoothly. It's important to him. He's introducing someone special, and I waited. She sighed. He said he didn't want you there, said your line of work doesn't exactly fit the image. He called it not a place for losers. I nodded to myself. My voice came out steady, far steadier than I felt. I understand. I'm sorry, she whispered, but I could tell she wasn't sorry for what had been said, only that I'd heard it. I ended the call. The room suddenly felt colder. I stared at the box on the table. The twine looked too neat, too optimistic now. I reached for my coffee mug and took a sip. Black. Bitter. Still warm. Outside, the last red leaf on the maple branch fluttered, then let go. As I sat down on the edge of the couch and looked at the fire, now a dim bed of embers. There was no anger, just a still ache settling in my chest, the kind that made you wish you hadn't hoped in the first place. I took a walk the next morning, boots crunching over a path of half-frozen leaves behind my house. The trail led into the woods, the same stretch of trees I used to wander as a kid when the world inside the house felt too loud, too sharp. There was a hill behind the old barn. At the top stood a gnarled apple tree, long since overgrown but still standing. I hadn't been up there in years. I stopped at the base of it now, shoving my hands into the pockets of my flannel. The bark was cracked, the branches half bare. A single bruised apple lay in the grass near the roots. When we were kids, Gideon and I used to climb this very tree. He was always faster, bolder, louder. He'd reach the best apples at the top while I waited below, picking through the ones that had already fallen. I'd tell myself they tasted just as sweet, but I knew they didn't. It had always been like that. Gideon got the new clothes, the private music lessons, the robotics camp one summer while I stayed home and helped Dad repaint the fence. Mom used to say, "He's got potential, that one. You can't teach charm like that." Then she'd turn to me and ask, "Why don't you try something bigger, Asher? Don't you want more?" And Dad? He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. The look he gave me the day I said I wanted to be a plumber said it all. Disappointment cloaked in polite silence. But I stuck with it. I went to trade school, I got my license, I built my own client list. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then came the twist I never told anyone. When Gideon got into college, he bragged about the scholarship he landed, how he'd done it all himself. But the truth was, he hadn't. I'd slipped $2,000 from my savings into his tuition account during his first semester. No one ever noticed. No one ever asked. At his graduation party, Mom gave a toast about how proud she was of Gideon's independence. Dad clapped him on the back like he was the next Kennedy. They never mentioned me. I remember standing in the back of the yard holding a plastic cup of warm punch, wondering how I could feel like a stranger in my own family. A year later, I drafted a business plan. It wasn't flashy, just a simple proposal to expand my services, bring on an apprentice, maybe invest in a small workshop downtown. I showed it to Dad. He read half a page, handed it back and said, "Don't overreach, Asher. You're not really built to run things." I folded the paper and never showed it to anyone again. Now, staring up at the crooked limbs of the apple tree, I realized something. I'd been climbing the same tree my whole life, just on the wrong side. No matter how high I reached, the good fruit was always picked before I got there. I headed back down the hill, the wind cutting through my jacket. My breath came out in clouds. Back in the garage, I sat in the truck, closed the door, and just sat in silence. No radio, no engine, just me and the air. I wasn't shocked that Gideon didn't want me at dinner. I was just surprised they finally said it out loud. They'd always left me out. This year, they just stopped pretending. And somehow that hurt more. 8 years ago, I was just a guy with calloused hands and a wrench in my back pocket, working odd plumbing jobs across the city. One afternoon, I got called to a leaky office sink in a cramped financial firm downtown. That's when I first met Sage. She was wearing glasses too big for her face, her hair in a loose braid, flipping through a spreadsheet. She looked up, offered a tight smile, and said, "Don't worry about the mess. I've been dealing with leaks in the numbers all morning." No disgust when I wiped oil on my jeans. No backhanded, "Why didn't you go to college?" Just curiosity. After that, she started inviting me for coffee downstairs after work. Not in a flirty way, more like she genuinely wanted to know who I was, where I came from, what I dreamed of. No one had ever asked before. Most people looked at me and saw a trade. She looked and saw a person. One day, over bitter black coffee and a stale blueberry muffin, I told her I didn't have some grand plan. I just wanted something steady. Not rich, not famous, just safe. She nodded. Then start small. Buy a piece of something that grows. She talked about compound interest like it was magic. Helped me set up a brokerage account. Walked me through ETFs, REITs, the S&P 500. She told me not to check it every day. Just water it like a plant and leave it alone. So I did. I started with $300, then $500. Sometimes I could only put in $20. But over time, with patience and 1,000 little sacrifices, no vacations, no new trucks, no nights out, I built something real. My net worth climbed from spare change to 7 figures. But I made one thing clear to Sage early on. I don't want anyone to know, especially not my family. I remember her blinking, surprised. "Not even your parents?" "Undermine, not them," I said. "They only ask about money when they think it's their business." She didn't press, just nodded. "Okay, it's our secret." And she kept it, for years, until a month before Thanksgiving. I was scrolling mindlessly on my phone during lunch break when I saw it. Sage and Gideon, dressed to the nines, seated in a plush booth at Ponce's Steakhouse. A place I could afford now, but never set foot in. She was laughing at something he said. His hand rested on the small of her back. The photo was tagged by Clara, my sister, who always had a flair for performance. I stared at it for a long time. Was it betrayal? Not quite. We weren't dating. We never had been. But it hit me like a punch to the chest. Not because I was jealous, okay, maybe a little, but because Gideon had a way of unearthing secrets, and Sage knew mine. I spent days battling it internally. Should I text her? Ask what was going on? Should I cut her off entirely or pretend I didn't care? But every time I almost hit send, I'd remember her voice, low and steady. "Asher, now you don't have to prove anything. Your value isn't in your shoes or your job title." I said nothing, just waited. I pulled out the worn notebook where I tracked every deposit and dividend. Flipping through it felt like reading a journal of my past 8 years, every number a milestone I never shared with anyone. The next time I saw her, a week before the holiday, we didn't talk about the photo. She smiled at me like she always had, but something sat heavy between us. And couldn't stop thinking. If she stood beside Gideon now, what side would she choose? Thanksgiving night, I sat in my tiny apartment with the fireplace flickering low and a mug of black coffee cooling in my hands. Outside, every window on my block glowed with life. Families eating, kids laughing, songs playing softly beneath the hum of conversation. I imagined the table at my parents' house, roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, Clara's oversalted green beans, laughter bouncing off the old chandelier, and in the one empty seat, mine, an absence nobody mourned. I didn't expect Sage to show up the next day, but she did, knocked softly, her eyes rimmed red. "I need to tell you what happened last night," she said. I let her in, wordless. She sat on the edge of the worn armchair like it might burn her. "It started normal. Wine, jokes. Clara made her speech. Then Gideon stood up with a champagne glass and said, 'Meet Sage, my girlfriend.' The perfect match for the kind of legacy our family represents." I stared at the floor. The fireplace crackled, but I felt cold. She swallowed. Then he said, He said you'd probably ruin the vibe if you came, that you were probably stuck in a sewer somewhere. Everyone laughed. Punishments tightened around the mug. She glanced at me. Your mom didn't say anything, just smirked. Your dad, quiet as always. Then Clara chimed in. Asher chose his path. No one forced him to live like that. I didn't flinch, but inside I folded. I knew they didn't think much of me, but to say it out loud in front of her, I couldn't sit through it, she said. I stood up. I looked at her now, really looked. Her hands were shaking. I told them they were wrong, she continued, that you weren't low or pitiful or beneath anyone, that you were the most consistent, decent, hard-working person I'd ever met, and that your investment portfolio was probably more impressive than any of theirs. I told them you weren't there because they didn't deserve you. Silence bloomed. I couldn't speak. She blinked fast. I know I broke your trust. I'm sorry. I should have kept the secret. But I couldn't let them spit on you like that. I wanted to be furious. I wanted to yell. But all I could think about was the way her voice must have cut through that room, the silence that probably followed, the look on Gideon's face. I finally said, "Do you regret saying it?" She met my eyes. No, but I think it changed things. Now they know, and they're not going to apologize. They're going to come crawling smiling like they're proud of you. And really, I finished, they'll want a piece. She nodded. I stepped out onto the porch that night. The sky was ink black, stars pinpricking the cold air. I'd spent years working in silence, building a life from scratch. Now, all it took was one dinner I didn't attend for the whole thing to shatter. Not the money, not the truth, the illusion that maybe, just maybe, I could belong without paying a price. But that illusion was gone now. And I was finally free. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, 5 days after Thanksgiving. I was under my truck, changing the oil, the gravel cold beneath my back, when the familiar crunch of luxury tires rolled up my driveway. I wiped my hands on a rag and sat up. There it was, Gideon's sleek black BMW, shining with arrogance, parked right up against the wooden fence I had built with my own hands. The doors opened in sequence like a scene from a play they'd rehearsed. My brother adjusting his cufflinks, Clara smoothing out her designer coat, and Leonard trailing behind, eyes scanning the land like he was sizing up a development property. Not a smile, not a hello, not even a how are you. Gideon spoke first. So you're good at investing, huh? Real impressive keeping that from us. Bit selfish, don't you think? Clara didn't wait a beat. Families share blessings. This is the time to collaborate. Leonard chimed in, his tone too rehearsed. Let's not make things difficult, Asher. We're here in good faith. Not a single one of them asked how I'd been, how I'd managed, or if I needed anything. All I heard were phrases like portfolio, opportunity, retirement strategy. Their eyes didn't see me. They saw the digits next to my name. Then Gideon reached into his coat and pulled out a thick folder. I've drawn up a proposal. You bring the capital, I bring the network. We could really scale this. I took the folder, barely glanced inside. Legal jargon and percentages. Vague projections. Zero soul. I looked him straight in the eye. And if I had no money? Gideon didn't flinch. Then I guess you'd still be under that truck, patching pipes while it rains. I turned toward the house, ready to walk away, when Mom stepped forward. We didn't come to fight. Let's remember, we're family. We've overcome so much before. I cut her off. Mom, you spent 20 years wishing I'd disappear. You looked at me like I was the dust under Gideon's shoes. I stopped trying to please you the day I realized your love had terms. Clara's voice cracked. We didn't come for this. We came to support you. I faced her. No. You came for numbers, for access. I'm not a stock to be leveraged. I'm your brother, and you never cared until I became profitable. Gideon's temper finally snapped. Don't be a fool. You think you're invincible now? Keep pushing us.
and you'll find out what it feels like when the whole world stops believing in you." Leonard sighed, grabbed Clara's elbow. "He's always been like this," he muttered as he turned to go. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You're tearing this family apart." I opened the front door and pointed to the driveway. "If you came here from money, and not from me, then consider me no longer part of the story you keep rewriting." They didn't argue. The door clicked shut behind them. Their steps faded into the gravel, replaced by a silence so thick it rang in my ears. In that quiet, I stood still, hand on the doorknob, feeling something hollow and enormous peel away inside me. For the first time, I was no longer the son trying to be accepted. I was simply free. And suddenly, that freedom felt heavier than chains. 2 weeks later, I got a message from a former client. "Hey Zeph, you okay? Just saw what Gideon posted." My gut clenched before I even opened the app. There it was, a long post, filled with polished outrage and curated sincerity. A photo of me in work clothes, hands smudged with grease, taken without my knowledge. Gideon's caption read, "Safeguard who you trust. Some hide behind toolboxes and blue-collar charm. Not every dollar is clean. Not every brother is honest." Underneath it, unsent 100 money, turbulence, #betrayed by blood. Mar in hours, local forums in Asheville picked it up. Whispers turned into comments, comments into posts, posts into threads. In his next post, Gideon got bolder. He hinted that I had ties to questionable sources of capital, claiming my investment success came suspiciously fast and with no clear explanation. He suggested I'd been laundering money through renovations. The damage was swift. 3 longtime clients canceled upcoming work. One of the biggest contracting partners I'd worked with for years emailed to pause all collaboration pending further review. When I walked into the corner grocery store, the woman who used to slip me free apples didn't even meet my eyes. She rang up my items wordlessly. A childhood friend texted, "I don't think it's true, but it's messy. I can't get involved. Hope you understand." I stared at that message longer than I should have, because I did understand. That's what hurt. Then came the calls from my mother. She sobbed over the line. "Zeph, why won't you just apologize to Gideon? He's hurting too. If you share a little, all this can calm down." She called it peace. I called it a payoff. Then a letter came from Dad, handwritten, 3 pages, double-spaced. "You're destroying the values this family stands for. Reputation matters. If you keep this up, we'll all fall with you." Not once did he ask how I was doing, if I was safe, if the lies were costing me more than work. I sat in the garage that night, alone under the flickering fluorescent light. The cold bled through the concrete into my spine. I stared at the for sale sign I had half written for the house, folded it, unfolded it. Turbulence to the truck beside me. Maybe it's time to leave Asheville. Start somewhere no one knows the name, Asher, Kane. Next door, Christmas lights blinked on, warm and rhythmic. My house remained dark, silent. I wasn't losing because I'd made mistakes. I was losing because no one had stayed long enough to see the truth of me, except myself. Maybe that would have to be enough. I got her text at 9:03 a.m. "Meet me at Patton Cafe, I think you need to hear this." No emojis, no explanations, just sage. By the time I got there, the cafe was nearly empty. I slid into the booth, flannel jacket still clinging to the chill of October. I hadn't shaved in days, and the iced coffee in front of me had long lost its bite. I just sat there, like me, flat, bitter, unfinished. Sage was already waiting, her hair tied back, face pale but composed. She didn't ask how I'd been. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "Gideon hired a lawyer. I found out through an old colleague who still works at his firm. They're building a case alleging you're laundering money." I didn't speak. Not because I was guilty. but because I knew how truth works around here. Slow, quiet, easily drowned by louder lies. They're reviewing old bank statements, trying to frame your investments as illegal, shell company nonsense, offshore accounts. I closed my eyes. He's spinning your silence into guilt, she said softly. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course he is. That's what Gideon does. He weaponizes doubt. Sage looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached into her tote and pulled out a legal pad. I can help. Let me audit your files. I'll draft a full report. No one knows financial structures in this county better than I do. We can prove every cent is clean. I shook my head. No. Her brow furrowed. Why? Because if you step into this, they'll come after you too. Your name, your job, everything you've built. I won't let that happen. I'm afraid? I think you deserve better than being dragged through the mud just for standing next to me. Her voice broke slightly. You're doing this for me, or because you think I won't stay once things get hard. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, you deserve someone this town respects, not someone they call a con man behind his back. She didn't cry. She just looked tired. I stood up. My coffee was still full, untouched. We ended up walking along the French Broad River. The sky was gray, water choppy. The bench we used to sit on was slick with rain. I stopped and turned toward her. I've tried to live honestly, quietly, but maybe that was never enough. Maybe the truth doesn't win unless you shout it. And I was never good at shouting. Sage said nothing. Not a hug, not a goodbye. Just two people parting, one step at a time, until there was nothing left to say. That night, I went home and opened the safe. Pulled out every folder, every notarized record, every receipt from the past 5 years. Spread them across the table, and whispered to myself, prove it or vanish. The knock came early, 7:10 a.m., Monday morning. Not frantic, not desperate. That kind of knock that tells you the person on the other side has done this before. Priye opened the door to two officers in uniform, eyes clear and cold. Asher Kane? The taller one asked. Yes. We need to ask you a few questions regarding your assets and financial records. I nodded. Come in. The living room was half lit by weak morning sun. Papers were still scattered across the table from last night's storm of anxiety. One officer read aloud from a printed document. Court-authorized request to review transactions related to the Kane estate, dated within the past 6 years. Allegations of financial impropriety have been submitted. My stomach dropped. But not from guilt. From the familiar weight of knowing someone is rewriting your story without asking you first. I have all the documents. Everything's clean, I said. Who filed the complaint? They didn't answer. They didn't have to. Only one man stood to gain from my ruin, and he was good at hiding behind the right hands. By evening, the story had broken, so I turned on the TV just in time to catch the end of the 6 o'clock news. And there he was, Gideon, wearing a neatly pressed shirt, tie knotted just a little too tight, sitting across from a local reporter. I loved my brother, he said, his voice cracking. But after everything he's done, someone has to protect our family name. I watched him force a tear, then another. I just want the truth. I believe in forgiveness, but there has to be accountability. The comments online were a mix of rage and sympathy. Half the town called me a coward. The other half called me misunderstood. No one called to ask how I felt. I sat in the dark, surrounded by files, by years of effort and quiet dignity, now questioned by a smirking face on television. My hands trembled. Then I remembered Sage's words. If you don't stand up and speak, they'll write the ending for you. I sat up, Grabbed the folders, sorted them, numbered them, typed an email. Subject: if you're still willing, I need you. To Sage Mitchell. I hit send. Then I zipped the documents into my leather case, locked the house behind me, and got into my truck. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller. Ahead, courtrooms, headlines, eyes waiting to see if I would bend or break. I adjusted the mirror, kept driving. Let them look. They were about to learn who I really was. Sage and I sat quietly in her office that morning, the air still carrying a trace of midnight. On the desk between us were neatly stacked folders, labeled and color-coded, filled with months of financial documents, bank statements, investment contracts, transaction reports, and tax invoices. She'd been up all night organizing them. "Everything's here," she said, sliding the top folder toward me. "We're going to fight this through the law. You won't go down for what someone else did." I nodded, voice barely a murmur. "Thank you for staying." Her eyes didn't soften.
She wasn't doing this out of pity. Sage fought for what she believed in, and for some reason she believed in me. By noon, her legal counsel, an experienced state-level attorney with sharp instincts, had filed a counter-motion with both the local court and the police department. The file included a formal request to launch an inquiry into Gideon's motives for pressing the charges against me. The real blow came with the annexed evidence. Gideon had been using company marketing funds for personal luxuries, first-class tickets to Cabo, a Rolex with his initials engraved on the back, and suspicious wire transfers labeled vendor consulting, which led to a personal PayPal account. His expense reports had been doctored for over 2 years with digital trails left carelessly behind. The company moved swiftly. HR terminated his employment under cause, freezing all outgoing payments tied to his name. Legal sent a cease and desist.
The irony? His accusations had triggered the audit that uncovered his own fraud. Meanwhile, Sage, never one to stay quiet when truth needed a platform, shared the story of my journey at a local community finance conference. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. Her words were precise. Some of us build wealth the hard way, with hands, patience, and dignity, and when they come for you, you stand. She made its way online. I didn't even know it had been recorded. But within 2 days, I began receiving messages. People I hadn't heard from in years. Clients from my repair business asking to be added back to the schedule. A retired professor mailed me a letter handwritten. "You reminded me what integrity looks like." The tide had turned. When we stood before the judge for the preliminary hearing, he flipped through the paperwork, set the file aside, and said, "There is no criminal basis for proceeding against Mr. Asher Kane. The court sees no fraud, only a poorly handled investment by a third party." The courthouse, I paused on the steps. The sky was pale with early spring, and the light rested on my shoulders the way it hadn't in years. Not heavy, not demanding, just light. That evening, Gideon showed up outside my gate. He looked like a man who'd run out of places to be angry. "I messed up," he said quietly. "I just wanted to be seen." I didn't open the gate. I handed him a sealed envelope through the iron bars. My handwriting was clean, no anger in the loops. "I don't hate you, but I don't have space in my life for people who only knock when they want something." He stood there for a while, then walked away. Sage stood behind me, her hand finding mine without a word. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain who I was to anyone. I already knew. 1 year later, in the blush of autumn, I married Sage. We chose a small hillside chapel, old and cedar-scented. Nothing extravagant, just white chrysanthemums tied to pews with twine and garlands of pine across the altar. It was peaceful, intimate. Our guest list was short. Milo, the thrift store owner who lent me tools when I couldn't afford my own. Lila, a retired teacher who'd brought her cracked heirloom lamp for repair. A few of Sage's colleagues, all sharp minds and kind eyes.
In the front row, 3 seats remained empty. One for my father, one for my mother, one for the brother who once called me worthless. None of them came. A week before the ceremony, I'd received a letter, no return address, but the script was unmistakable, my mother's. I won't come, I don't deserve to, but if one day you find space in your heart to forgive, I'll still be here, waiting. I didn't reply. Not that I get it too. After the wedding, Sage and I moved into a modest 2-story house just outside Asheville, with a creaky porch and a small backyard. I planted an apple tree from seeds I'd saved as a boy, picked from the old tree behind my parents' house. A symbol, maybe. Or just something to tend to with my hands. I still drove my old truck, still wore flannel, still drank black coffee from a chipped mug. For the first time, there was no aching silence in my mornings, just stillness. 6 months after his court-ordered probation ended, Gideon sent a message. Just one. You were right, I lost everything. But I found myself in the rubble. I read it once. I didn't answer. Not because I held a grudge, but because I'd learned that not every relationship needs a resolution. Some truths settle best in silence. One morning, Sage and I stood by the kitchen window. The apple tree had bloomed, 5 pale pink flowers trembling in the breeze. I rested my hand on the sill and said, "You're the family I was always searching for." She smiled, leaning into my shoulder. "And you're home, Asher." No applause, no audience. Just coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the quiet certainty that we had made it to the other side, on our own terms.